For some people, their first taste of the game MediEvil came from this particular Pizza Hut PlayStation 1 demo disc that showed off titles such as Metal Gear Solid, Tomb Raider 3, Gran Turismo, Crash Bandicoot 3, and of course MediEvil. Well, not me. The only demo disc that I remember playing in my life is this bland-ass Sony PS1 demo disc. Take a look at this bad boy. I was all over some amazing games like Atlantis, The Lost Empire, Monsters Inc., fucking Barbie Explorer, and funny enough, Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, which I actually just took a look at, so check it out. I'd never even heard of MediEvil until I was around 10 years old and the reimagining came out for the PSP. Being that weird kid who's into dead, morbid, horror-themed things, I really wanted this game. But, I guess I kinda forgot about it. In the years to come, I grew pretty aware of who the great Sir Daniel Fortescue was and how he was a classic PS1 era character, but I guess I never became all that curious about his games. That wasn't until I saw that the OG PS1 version of MediEvil was getting a from the ground up remake when it was fully revealed back on Halloween of 2018. I couldn't get the game upon release during October this year, but I did finally manage to grab it during the PS Store's Black Friday sale in November.
Spooky time is over. Save it for a Halloween special. Your channel sucks anyways.
See, there's never a wrong time for spookiness or all things related to the spookies. And most importantly, there's never a wrong time to experience a game for the first time, remake or not. So, here we have MediEvil on the PS4. The first time we hear of Sir Daniel Fortescue of Gallowmere, we are told that he led the king's forces to victory in a battle against the evil sorcerer / former royal advisor Zarok, only for Dan to succumb to his wounds after defeating him. In reality, Dan was killed by the very first arrow fired in the battle. To avoid absolute embarrassment, the king covered it up and deemed Dan the hero of Gallowmere, while Zarok seemingly vanished without a trace. Fast forward 100 years and Zarok is returned, casting a spell that sends Gallowmere into an endless cycle of night, raises an undead army, and steals the souls of the living. Zarok's plans had a glaring problem though, as Sir Dan was among the dead who were resurrected, and he has a huge chip on his shoulder. With the chance to finally earn his place in the fabled Hall of Heroes, Daniel Fortescue sets out to rightfully earn the title of Hero of Gallowmere. You're given the motivation to begin Sir Dan's journey, and all you have to do is get him to his ultimate destination. There are no exposition dumps or plot twists halfway through the game, aside from all these books placed throughout levels that shed some backstory in the history of Gallowmere, specifically around the time of Sir Dan's death. Dan is a very likable character, and his lack of a jaw and the ability to properly speak does nothing to keep him from stealing the show. Even with his barely intelligible speech and rather bouncy mannerisms, Dan is able to perfectly display his sarcastic and impatient personality. When engaging in conversation, you can see how little Dan's attention span is by how his skull is constantly swiveling around, frequently staring at the player as if he's impatiently waiting on you to skip the cutscene. You can also really tell how much he hates to be reminded of the failure that was his last day alive. As he clumsily bounces around in a skeletal form, Sir Dan is constantly teased by these gargoyles and the heroes themselves that reside in the Hall of Heroes throughout his journey for his false heroism, often resulting in Dan becoming angry, driving him to prove that he isn't the cowardly faker that he was in life. The evil Zarok is a mashup of every generic villain quality ever. Stereotypically satanic in appearance, Zarok reminds me of a more demented version of Jafar from Aladdin. Long clothing, big staff, creepy and almost awkward in nature, intelligent, arrogant, and a habit of mocking and insulting the main character. I wouldn't really say that Zarok was a good villain, but the guy really knew how to make an impact.
None shall defeat the mighty Zarok.
Apart from encountering a cast of highly detailed enemies such as your typical zombies, evil scarecrows, killer pumpkins, thieving imps, and skeleton pirates, Dan will cross paths with a witch or two who can send him off to do them a favor in return for important items, and even a little ugly fairy will ask Dan to help him rescue some of his buddies from ants. Each of these characters are really amusing to interact with, especially the fairy because of his appearance and his voice that I really love to imitate. What I enjoyed most about the characters Dan encounters is how they all know who he is, and they even know the truth of how he died. I found it funny how the game always pokes fun at how the truth of the legacy of Daniel Fortescue is seemingly the worst kept secret ever. With this game being a nearly frame-for-frame remake of the PS1 classic, the gameplay is what you'd expect, whether you've played MediEvil before or not. The game is archaic in nature and is a preservation of the early stages of the hack-and-slash era. As Sir Dan, you bumble your way through the dimly lit, green Halloween goo-filled gothic lands of the absolutely beautiful Gallowmere. Levels are linear and tend to involve completing a range of objectives in order to complete them, and by objective I mean mindlessly mashing the square button to cleave through waves of enemies that happen to be close to a certain rune that goes to a specific door. I can't really say that I like this idea very much, as it tended to lead to lots of backtracking through levels since the concept is used in just about every single location. In my opinion, the game does do a very good job of preventing this from becoming too repetitive. You're given a decent variety of weapons to experiment and play around with. Some of these weapons, such as the club and the warhammer, are given further use when it comes to puzzle solving. It's not really that deep, and you'll just be doing things like using the club as a torch to light other torches, smash rocks, or in this case, grave slabs to access otherwise hidden areas that lead to the rest of the level. Combat itself is not this game's strong suit, despite being such a huge part of it, and it never feels like it requires any thought process to overcome the enemy. There are no combinations, only the same attacks you'll spam with different weapons that really have no difference aside from attack speed and damage output. You can of course choose to fight from afar with a crossbow and several different types of bows, but I honestly never even bothered unless I had to deal with the not so frequent but annoying ass flying enemy. You'll no doubt gather coins in this game that can be used at vendor gargoyles to replenish all of your projectiles, so there's no need to worry about running out of arrows or spears. No matter how you decide to fight though, you're going to always be hit, and you're going to always be on the hunt for energy vials to fill up your hopefully growing collection of life bottles that refill your health bar, essentially acting as extra lives. Your best source of defense will be from a range of shields that can be found in levels that only differ in appearance and how much damage they can take before finally breaking. There are also these lore-friendly rejuvenation fountains that are powered by remnants of Xeroc's resurrection magic and will restore Dan's health along with filling a life bottle or two until it's exhausted. Paying attention to how many life bottles you have left is really important, believe it or not. Boss fights are really hit and miss, sadly. All of them are entirely too easy and require almost no thought or strategy. The worst one of the bunch would probably be this pair of demons. The tiny platform you fight on is constantly tilting and the bosses are flying around shooting fireballs at you. Your best bet here is to just jump around like an idiot and mash the attack button with your bow since you automatically lock onto them. There are a couple of good bosses though, even if they're too easy. I really enjoyed redirecting a cannon and using my torch club to shoot it at the ghost ship captain. Making good use of my warhammer to play a game of puzzle fight / whack-a-mole against a dragon was pretty fun too. And surprisingly, the final boss fight is really entertaining and has multiple phases. In general, the game is rather easy and takes no skill to complete, but with how unavoidable and numerous enemy attacks are and how platforming is challenging in the wrong ways thanks to an imprecise camera and poorly aged controls, you'll most definitely die quite a few times. And when you do die, you restart the entire level over again. There are no checkpoints, and when you're running through levels like the god-awful maze-like anthill only to be thoroughly shat upon by the rocks falling during this bullshit Ant Queen fight right before you finish her off, things can get pretty frustrating. There can be some satisfaction gained from barely making it to a conveniently placed health fountain or exploring the narrow nook between some buildings and finding an energy vial. And if you're really desperate and you manage to complete the anthill level, you can throw the very limited but most unique weapon in the game, the chicken leg, at an enemy to turn them into a roasted chicken that restores a small amount of health. As you defeat enemies, you'll notice that what I guess is called the chalice meter will fill up to 100% after you defeated a certain amount of enemies. This allows you to collect at certain levels chalice, which will allow you to access the Hall of Heroes in between levels. Here you'll interact with each of the hall's inhabitants who rewards you with words of wisdom, disdain for Sir Dan, new weapons, currency, and even some health items. Collecting every chalice in the game will also reward you with MediEvil's true ending. It might sound like a chore to always have to earn access to the chalices, but in reality you'll really never need to go out of your way to defeat enough enemies, and finding the location of the chalices can sometimes be pretty fun. I remember finding some sheet music that I promptly brought to the ghost of a man playing a piano I had met earlier, which revealed that level's chalice. Speaking of fun little levels, the Sleeping Village level was probably one of my favorites in the game, even though I pretty much loved all of them. It almost felt like the developers took inspiration from games in the survival horror genre and put more of an emphasis on exploring a creepy, desolate area and making interesting use of items. While exploring the village, I came across a church that was missing the crucifix that had once been hanging on the wall, so I ended up finding a mold of a large crucifix and a golden bust of the village mayor, both of which I took to a blacksmith shop, where I then used the force to create a replacement crucifix for the church that ended up revealing a hidden item needed to progress the level. While I wish that more levels had been designed with even more exploration in mind, like the Sleeping Village, I still found enjoyment in everything else. Each level always ended up having some sort of secret area to find a type of reward waiting. The most memorable of these was early on in the graveyard when you come across a broken bridge above a row of caskets floating down a stream underneath it. The back of my mind told me to jump on top of one of these caskets and voila, secret area with healing items, money, and a book congratulating me for finding the area. Still, many levels were memorable based on their atmosphere and aesthetic alone. While the Scarecrow field annoyed the absolute shit out of me because I started it with very little health and no life bottles, I really loved duking it out with some of the hellish looking Scarecrows and avoiding the wheat fields as much as possible due to whatever beast was lurking in them. Dodging spiky wheat and corn grinder looking devices and setting hay bales on fire with my club torch to a very Danny Elfman-esque score made me feel like it was in a scene from Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow. And even though this level was one of the shorter ones, Pools of the Ancient Dead ended up being the most creepy of the bunch. To me, it's one of the more personal levels in the game as well, since it was where the Battle of Gallowmere was fought, and of course where Sir Dan was slain. What was once a great battlefield is now a barren swamp full of crumbling defenses and narrow platforms. Not to mention that the now resurrected corpses of the men that Daniel once led into battle are now out to destroy their champion. Helping the oddly present Death himself ferry some lost souls in the form of helmets that have to be collected will gain you passage to the next level of Succotown on Mellowmead. Prior to finding one of these soul helmets, I played through one of my favorite set pieces in the game. It started by being chased down by this big chariot type device, followed by getting locked into an area full of undead soldiers. To me, it felt like a cool little war simulation, but I also experienced one of only 2 glitches in my playthrough here. The last enemy that I needed to defeat was stuck behind the closed off way back, and I just kinda stood there for a minute. I figured that I was going to have to make Dan commit not live and restart the level, but the first time I jumped off the cliff, the enemy somehow died. So, cool. The only other glitch I encountered in the game was just during the beginning of the also pretty cool ghost ship level where I somehow got stuck inside of this ramp. Glitches weren't really that big of an issue for me in MediEvil, which is odd according to other reviews I've read and watched. I did find lots of problems with the camera specifically though. As I mentioned before, I blamed the camera itself for a lot of damaging falls that I had to deal with. I knew that I could have quite easily switched to the over-the-shoulder Dan cam, but I wanted to keep the experience as true to the source material as possible. There were many times where the camera would just abruptly change angles, causing me to veer off the edge of a platform and make me want to stop and reorient Sir Dan, only for me to go in the opposite direction of what was input. I also had a fair bit of trouble when it came to reading books and opening chests. Sometimes the input prompt would pop up when facing the side of them, but when I pressed it, Sir Dan would kinda just stand there or attempt to slide into the right place to start that particular animation, only to not even fully go through with it. Turns out that I needed to be exactly in front of the chest or book in order to interact. Pair this with the occasional frame rate dip and you have a pretty fair reason to get frustrated with the game at times. Not to mention that loading screens can be entirely too long, entirely too frequently. MediEvil might not have aged as well mechanically or had the same amount of polish as other faithful remakes such as Spyro Reignited Trilogy or the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, but in my opinion it's better than these in terms of atmosphere and the overall personality that it possesses. Surely that's just the horror-obsessed spooky stuff lover that I am deep down doing the talking. While the game has its fair share of problems and some missed opportunities regarding level design, there is still a massive amount of mindless fun to have in the beautifully disgusting land of Gallowmere with all the things that go bump in the night as Sir Daniel Fortescue. Sadly, I don't share the nostalgia for this game that a lot of others do, but I still love it all the same and I'm incredibly glad that I finally had the chance to play this classic title for the first time. I feel like I tried my hardest to avoid being biased when talking about MediEvil, but the experience as a whole was really captivating to me. And I feel that this is the perfect game for someone to add to their list of spooky titles that they replay around Halloween time.